All right, so welcome for today. All right, so today going to go over web development primer. I feel up for it again. Last time went over this, the mic went out. Didn't realize it. Did a whole hour presentation with the mic not working, and was very disappointed. But anyway, so today we're going to go over the web development workshop or fundamentals primer, whatever you want to call it. And hopefully by the end of this presentation, you will have a better understanding of web development in just this one presentation. Okay, so let's begin. When I did this presentation in the past, let's see here, you could follow the exercises by going to this link here and downloading the code. There's like a base boilerplate code. I believe it still exists there, but technically you don't have to. This is a pretty simple tutorial, so you don't even have to follow the code if you don't want, although it is optional. Another recommendation is that you work on, let's say if you are following along with this tutorial, you just use a very basic text editor, or let's say Visual Code is a good code editor as well. But I don't recommend anything too more advanced than that, because what we're trying to show here is that web development is just basically text editing at the very minimum, and there's nothing complicated with compiling or encoding or any of that cryptic nature. It's just pure text, and that's what the browser is eventually reading, is just a pure text file and interpreting that text file. So any text editor would do. Got my coffee today. All right, so in this example, in the past, I used TextEdit for some reason. I don't even use that anymore on Mac, but I use Visual Code again nowadays, and the majority of the world uses Visual Code as well. It's a very simple code editing tool. Okay, so to begin talking about web development, let's first look at a bird's eye view, as this slide says. We're going to do an analogy here. I like to work with analogies. So we're going to compare web development to something that we are all accustomed to. Okay, and what we are accustomed to is, let's say, the human body. Okay, so the website, web development is a lot like, let's say, humans. Okay, so at the very core of us, we have what we call, a lot of us call, we have our guts. Okay, it's our heart, our organs. Okay, so this slide right here is showing our guts. All right, and next, let's say, how do we build a human being? The next thing we need is, let's say, a skeleton to give structure to these guts. Because without a skeleton, let's say, guts on the ground, that means nothing. So we need structure, a skeleton, to give placement to our guts. And finally, once we have our skeleton and our guts are nicely organized, then we can begin to style ourselves, let's say with our hair or the shirt we're wearing, or our shoes. And the special thing with style is that it's not permanent. You can, let's say, one day choose this style and one day choose another style. Okay, and what you will see is that web development, good web development, good web coding is very similar in a way where style can be interchanged rather flexibly and easily. And lastly, the last, let's say, layer of a human being, or beings in general, is their behavior. How do they move? How do they talk? How do they, throw a punch, for example? So that's their behavior. And again, websites, you will see we can add a level of behavior as well on top of our guts, structure, and style. Okay, so this next slide here is comparing. Okay, so what is the heart of a web page? All right, so let's say what when you compare two websites, what is the guts of a website? Give you a second to think about that. Ah, a little bit too long. Probably lost a few viewers there. So in website, web data, web development land, whatever you want to call it. Okay, your content, your data is the guts, the heart of your website. Okay, so for example, your company name, your brand, your slogan, products, your product descriptions, your product images, and of course your contact information. How do they contact you? So your data is the guts of your website. Okay, and here, for example, I give a little example website for, let's say, Ken's Burgers, a restaurant developed by me. Okay, so the products would be hamburger, cheeseburger, french fries, onion rings, milkshake. Slogan, the best burgers in town. Images here for my products. And finally, the address. Okay, fictitious address, by the way. Don't try to go there or call that number. Actually, this was my old cell phone number, but it doesn't exist anymore, actually. Okay, so that being said, okay, so once you have the data, then what provides structure for a web page? Similar to how a skeleton provides structure for your organs, okay, what provides structure for your web page? Because again, without structure, your data is just kind of lying on the ground as a huge pile of mess. Okay, so just getting right to the point here. The HTML file provides structure for your data on a web page. Okay, so what is the HTML file? HTML itself stands for what it stands for is hypertext markup language. Okay, and we'll get more to why they call it that later. But pretty much your HTML in there, you're organizing your data. For example, we're saying here that our main title with the H1 tag, which we'll talk more about later, that's my main title. And let's say next, my slogan comes next. And finally, I put my list of products. So as you can see here, we are structuring our data. Our data with our HTML file, similar to the human being, the skeleton provides structure for the organs. Okay, more on that to come. Okay, so once you provide structure for your data and you have an HTML file and you open it up in a web browser, here's actually what you're going to see. You're going to see pretty much this with, let's say, default styles. We won't talk about styles yet. But with just the simple markup, the browser will start to understand the meaning of your content a little better. Okay, moving on. So then what provides style for a web page? Similar to, this stylish person over here. So what provides the style for a web page? And the answer to that, getting direct to the point, is the CSS file. Okay, you can imagine the CSS file as a shirt that you put onto the web page, and in web page land, web development land, I can't talk today. The CSS file is what provides the style for your website. So let's rewind a little bit here. If you noticed in the HTML file, we have ID tags, class tags here. Okay, so in the CSS file, that gives us little hooks, okay, that we can hook onto to put style onto those elements. So for example, here I'm saying that the company name, I want it to be purple. I want the slogan to be green. The menu list, the list of menu, I want the background to be brown, and so on. So the CSS file can latch onto these HTML elements by these IDs that we provided and with these class names. Okay, and more on that later. But for now, just know that we can hook onto that and put styles on top of each element, like we're putting a hat on my head or we're putting a shirt on my body. Similarly similar. Okay, so once you have a CSS file and you load it with your HTML into the browser, then you'll see that your web page will begin to have some style, as you can see here. Okay, and lastly, if you recalled from the analogy earlier, the last layer, let's say, of a human being is their behavior. How do they talk? How do they move? How do they walk? Okay, so then what provides the layer behavior for a website? A second. And the answer to that is JavaScript, the JavaScript file. Okay, so with JavaScript, as you can see here, we'll just look at the concrete example. We can make, let's say, the product list slowly fade in when you enter the page. Okay, so you visit the page. Initially, you don't see the products list, but slowly it fades in. And that gives it a layer of behavior, a little bit of style too, but a layer of behavior on top of your web page. And that's accomplished. Things like that are accomplished with the JavaScript file. Okay, so putting it all together, HTML, your structure. Okay, within that HTML is your data to begin with, the guts of your web page. So HTML, your structure, your CSS, you put the shirt on, and then finally the JavaScript file, you go into action, you move. Okay, and if you load that into the browser, here you won't be able to see the example, but initially let's say the product list is not showing, and then it's going to slowly fade in. Okay. Okay, so what am I trying to show on this slide? So here are web browsers that we're all aware of. We have Internet Explorer, we have Chrome, we have Safari for people that use iPhone and Macintosh, MacBook Pros. And finally, we have Firefox that people don't really use this anymore, do they? But here are our, let's say, different web browser brands. And regardless of which web browser you're using, these web browsers, they will follow what you call the Web W3C standard that defines, okay, how should I read an HTML file? How should I interpret a CSS file? How should I interpret a JavaScript file? So regardless of which browser you're using, it is supposed to follow, let's say, these standards and render your web page in a very similar fashion, if not exactly similar. You know, different web browsers will, render things slightly differently. If you will, if you begin to, doing this type of work, you will realize that. But in summary, they should render the page fairly, if not 100%, the same way. Okay, so again, we feed these pure text files, again, they're just text files, not compiled, just pure text files, into these browsers, and then it's going to render your page, as you see here. Okay, another way to look at websites, web development, another analogy, let's say, besides the human being analogy, is let's say we're trying to build a house. So again, our foundation is our content, our products, our services, and that's the core of your business, is your data. Okay, so that, let's say that is the bottom layer. On top of that, you will add HTML to structure that data. Okay, so once you have the data, you have to organize it, highest priority first, second priority, and so on. Then after you structure your data, then you put a layer of style on top. Let's say you put carpeting on your house now. You put a layer of style on your house or your website. And then finally, you sprinkle on the special effects or any kind of animations with JavaScript. And let's say, JavaScript can do a lot of other things as well, but we won't get into that yet. Okay, so here I put some unrecommended priorities because I feel like the web development world is just so big and people just do things in so many different ways, and you can do things in a good way and you can do things in a, let's say, a bad way. And here are, I would say, some unrecommended priorities. For example, let's say if a person or a developer is designing a web page for a business, then a unrecommended priority is, let's say, they start out with the style or the special effects, and they present the customer, hey, you should, have a website with, these colors and this, let's say, these animations, and then after that, fill in the data of the customer and the structure of the data afterwards. I would say that is unrecommended priorities, and I strongly believe that is not good web development. As I would say, W3C, let's say the W3C standard, they do have some recommendations. If you go to their website, from what I recall, they do have recommendations on how things should be done because they are the ones that come out with these standards. And they do say, HTML, should be used for this, CSS should be used for this, and so on. So I would say, they agree with me. I might be wrong there, but get some hater comments down there. But anyway, I hope you trust me on that one. Okay, so let's go through an example. Actually, let's build a website. After knowing all that, okay. So the first thing, like we said, we have to develop our content, the guts to our website. So here, okay, here are some steps, and you can use this. Let's say you're designing a website for a customer. You can use the template I present today. So the first thing you want to do, of course, is to identify the company name. Second thing, usually companies will have, let's say, a slogan to further define the products of the company or the mission of the company. Finally, you want to, not finally, but next, then you want to start to define your products, or let's say your most important products. After you have products, of course, you need to have pictures of them. Pictures tell 1,000 words. So pictures is some of the most important content on a website. And finally, of course, you have to have the contact information of the company. So in exercise 1, step 1, we're going to develop our content. And again, I come up with a fictitious company here called Ken's Burger for the company name. The best burgers in town is the slogan. Products, let's say hamburgers, cheeseburger, french fries are our top products. We're a simple restaurant. And let's say here are some pictures, file names for our pictures, and finally our address. Okay, again, a fake address. You will not find a restaurant there in reality. Okay, so here, number 2, what we just did is that we had our content in step 1. So that step 2 here, we want to start to add structure to our data. So going to step 2 here, okay, we're going to open up our text file. All right, so here, so this should be your text file or text editor. So again, you could use Notepad, you can use Visual Code, but again, I recommend just something very basic because I want to drill into you that web development is just simply text files. And the web browser is just reading text files. It's not compiling it into anything else. It's just reading that pure text file and interpreting it like, let's say, a human being. If I read a book, I'm going to interpret it and come to my own conclusions. And same thing with the browser. It's going to read your content interpret it and come up with its own conclusion of what the website should look like, and then render the website for you. That's what web browsers do. So here, okay, we're just going to plop down our content top down. Okay, so no HTML yet. We're just going to plop our content highest priority to lowest priority. And that is kind of, let's say, one way I would recommend to start your HTML. Let's say you're designing a page from scratch, and let's say you don't have a design or a graphical, let's say a graphic designer who came up with your design yet, and you're just trying to organize your ideas. So first thing I would recommend before even writing HTML is just plop down the data first priority to low priority, as I show here. Okay. Now, if you open this HTML file, or again, just think of it as a text file, in the browser, at this point, okay, here's what you're going to see. And it's not going to mean much. It's not going to mean much to the browser or even us because, you may have guessed it, we haven't defined the HTML yet. Okay, and this further iterates. What is the purpose of HTML? And again, over the centuries that web development has been in existence, centuries, okay, HTML has been used correctly and also abused. I would say abused, as with any technology, anything in life. It can be used correctly or incorrectly. And to use HTML correctly, it should be just data driven and no styling in mind. Okay, meaning your HTML should define the meaning of your content. Okay, I might seem like I'm rambling here, but let's go back to the example where we just have the pure text here. Okay, so when we have the pure text, the pure data here, no HTML yet, okay, I haven't told the browser what does my content mean. Okay, again, a browser is not an artificial intelligent being or entity. So if it just sees random text, it's not going to know what does that text mean. Okay, again, note what I say, mean. The meaning, the semantics of my text. It doesn't know what it means. So then if it doesn't know what it means, it's just going to render it just as, let's say, pure text like this. Okay, one character after another. Okay, so that brings us to the point of what is the purpose of HTML? Well, the purpose of HTML is to tell your browser, hey, this is what, let's say, this is what Ken's Burger means. It's the title of my page. Okay, hey, this is what the best burgers in town means. It's just, let's say, it's regular text. It's my slogan. So I don't want to give it the same priority as my title. So I just call it some regular text on my page. Okay, next, let's say the menu, okay, the list of products. Let's say this menu text itself, I also want to tell the browser that, hey, this is also a title, but maybe of less importance of the main title. Okay, following on to that, then I have my list of products. Okay, and here I want to say, hey, this is a list of things. Okay, a list. It's not just random text, it's a list. Okay, so I also want to tell my browser that because, again, you can imagine the browser as this stupid thing that just doesn't know anything. It's not artificial intelligent. It's not even intelligent to be, well, it's not intelligent. It's not artificial intelligent. It's pretty much just stupid. So you got to tell it specifically, what does every piece of content mean on my page? Okay, and finally, let's say the address here. Let's say address itself, the text is also, let's say, another title for a subsection in my page. And here I also say, hey, this address text, it's a title. Okay, don't ignore this bottom address itself. I don't want to confuse you. The address here, address text itself, is going to be a title of this little subsection. And I want to specify that that address word is also a title. Okay, so what does that look like in HTML? Well, HTML provides these things called HTML tags, and you've probably seen it. You probably dabbled in web before you visited this presentation, but hopefully I can start you with a clean slate here. Okay, clear your mind. Start with a clean slate. So HTML tags, okay, are meant to describe the meaning of your content. Okay, now again, this has been abused and misused over time by, let's say, various branches of people, large branches. Some people use, let's say, HTML tags with more of styling in mind. For example, let's say they use the H1 tag. Oh, I want this text to be really, really big, so I'm going to use an H1 tag. Okay, so that's a wrong way to use HTML. Okay, you should be using HTML tags, and the original meaning of, or the original intent of HTML tags is to describe the meaning of your content and not describe the style of your content. Okay, note the two differences there. Okay, so the H1 tag that is provided by HTML is used for describing that, hey, this piece of content is a title. Okay, that's what it means. It's a title, and it's the most important title, the #1 title of my page. Okay, and usually, let's say your brand name of your company, or the most important title on your page is the H1 tag. So, okay, moving on. Okay, so there's all sorts of HTML tags, as you may be aware. We have our H tags, which define titles and headings. We have P, or paragraph tags, to define regular text, regular content. We have UL and LI tags to define, let's say, a list. As I mentioned earlier, my products list. So the UL and LI tags define lists and list items in that list. Okay, and there's many, many other tags, but here we're just showing some of the more common ones. Okay, so now that we know what some of these HTML tags mean, okay, we're going to start to mark up our text, our content. And that brings us back to, what does HTML stand for? It stands for Hypertext Markup Language. Again, hypertext markup language. So again, note that it's text, just pure text, nothing complicated. Okay, markup. Okay, so markup, what does markup mean? If you have a marker, okay, you mark up. Let's say you have a newspaper or a textbook that you're writing on or highlighting. Okay, you're marking up that newspaper or you're marking up that textbook. And that's kind of the same thing you're doing here when you're marking up your content. You're just telling each piece of content, or you're marking up each piece of content and saying what it means, if that makes sense. So let's say here, we're going to walk through our data and mark it up. So first, Ken's Burger, we're going to mark that up with our marker and say that's H1. That's a title, the most important title. Okay, next, the best burgers in town. Okay, we're going to mark that up with a P tag, okay, with our marker, because that is the, let's say, some basic description, just basic content. It's not a title, it's just basic text. So we're going to mark it up with a P. Okay, next, menu. Oh, that's a title as well. We're going to mark it up with a H, but with a 2, because we're saying here it's not as important as our brand name, but it is also, you know, a pretty important section within our website. So we mark it up with the H2 with our marker. Okay, and next we have a list of products. So again, a UL tag. So UL stands for unordered list. Okay, so we're going to mark that up with a UL to tell the browser. Again, the browser is so stupid, it doesn't understand anything. So you got to specifically tell it what every piece of content means. Okay, so okay, we're going to mark this up with the UL. And then each item in there, we're going to mark up with the LI tag. LI stands for list item. Okay, and finally at the bottom here, address, we're going to mark up with the H3, because again, address is going to be, let's say, another little subsection on our web page, but let's say not as important as the menu subsection. So we're going to put that with less priority with the H3. Okay, and finally, the address itself is just some basic text, so we're just going to put a P on there. So notice I kept doing this because I want to reiterate that that's what you're doing when you're writing HTML, is you're just marking up your content to best describe it as best as possible to this stupid web browser. Okay, that's what you're doing. And the more detailed you describe your content, okay, the more you can pepper on tags that actually have meaning, okay, not peppering on tags just for the purpose of helping us style the page later, which, is the wrong way of thinking when you're writing HTML, and a lot of people do it, by the way. Okay, when you're writing HTML, you should just think purely meaning, purely content, purely semantics. Okay, on trying to mark up this content, describe it as best as possible for this stupid browser that doesn't understand what this random text means. Okay, so that is your HTML. So here we show the marked up language, not the marked up language, sorry. The marked up, can't talk today. The marked up content, okay? And once you load that into your browser, which I believe is the next slide, okay, now it's not random text anymore. Okay, my browser is actually starting to become a little more enlightened. It can understand my content more. So once it understands my content more, it can actually display the content in a more intelligent manner. Okay, but here is a little catch two. Is that the thing people say? The catch two. The catch here is that when people see this, okay, let's say definitely, especially with beginner web developers, when they see this, okay, then they fall into a trap because they start to think, oh, my HTML is used for styling. Oh, H1 is big. Oh, H2 is a little smaller but still bold text. Oh, the address, okay, it's a little smaller and a little bold. Oh, there's little dots here for list. So right away, they think that HTML, I'm going to use it for the purpose of visually representing my content. And again, that is the wrong way to think about HTML. And then that will bring you right away to the question, then what is the purpose of HTML then? What is the purpose if it's not for styling? And the answer to that, I would say, can get philosophically deep, according to me. But again, just know that hypertext hypertext markup language, okay, it's meant to mark up the meaning of your page. And the smarter you do that, okay, let's say, I'll just give some random examples. Let's say web engines, search browsers, they don't care, search browsers doesn't care what your page looks like for the most part. But it cares more about, okay, what is the links on this page? What is the title of the page? What is, let's say, the product list on the page? Okay, very important for search results. Okay, and you know, there's some search results nowadays where they actually kind of post-process your content a little bit and provide like a little mini template of your web page. Not in your style, but let's say, here's your home page, here's your menu, here's your contact. Google will create those little, let's say, cards automatically. And I would say that, the better you mark up your content, the better chance Google will have of interpreting that content and understanding that content. Of course, nowadays there's artificial intelligence and it can pick up on things a lot better without good markup. But let's say in the previous days and even present days, okay, your markup really helps browsers and, let's say, machines. It helps machines understand the content of your meaning, and that's the purpose of HTML. So make sure you're marking it up as best as possible with the meaning of your content, the semantics of your content, and using those HTML tags wisely, using and choosing those HTML tags wisely. Okay, and what you will see is that, okay, and then again, don't jump ahead to styling too quick, but what you will see is that if you describe your content very well with HTML, you will naturally have all the tags you need that will help you with styling later. Okay, but then again, don't fall into that trap though. Don't fall into that trap. Okay, next. Okay, so one thing we saw, let's say with the previous example, is that with our H1, our P, and our list tags, okay, it displayed it nicely, but let's say these file names, these hamburger JPEG, cheeseburger JPEG, and fries JPEG, okay, here it's just displaying as text. Like why isn't it displaying as an image? Okay, give you a second to think about that one. Okay, well the answer is that you didn't tell the browser that, hey, this piece of text here is a file name. And if you don't tell it it's a file name, or let's say an image file name, then it's just going to render it as pure text. Okay, so HTML come to the rescue. You have a tag called the img tag, or the image tag, that says, hey, this piece of content is a file name representing an image. Okay, so once you pepper that on, once you mark that up, okay, so here's how you mark it up. With the image tag, you have a source attribute, and inside there, then you specify the file name or the path to the file itself. Okay, and once you pepper that on or mark that up, again with the marker, you're marking it up. Again, nothing magical with the image tag. Okay, it's not this magical thing that compiles to something or what something. It's just text, and you're just marking up your text here and saying that, hey browser, hey stupid browser, this is an image. Okay, this is an image. Okay, so render it as an image and not as pure text. Okay, so that's what you're doing here when you're marking it up with the image tag. And after you do that, when you open it in the browser, then you will see that the browser will now be smart enough to render that text. Okay, now it's not just text anymore, it's representing a file name or a path to a file, and it's going to render those images. And that's making me hungry. Even though I'm a vegetarian now, desires. Put my desires away. Okay, so, okay, after all that is said, oh, we have some close here. Close is not on. But, so after we have our HTML, okay, we want to put some close on for some styling. Okay, so how do we do that? How do we do that? Well, before we do that, like I said, we have to provide little hooks on our HTML so that our clothes can hook onto. Okay, so you imagine a piece of fabric. Okay, you got to hook it on something. Okay, that's what your tags, these class names and IDs on each tag is providing those hooks for you to style. And the thing with these class names is that they are user defined. Okay, there's no standard to them. You can name it whatever you want. And that makes things great because it gives you flexibility, but also like a double-edged sword, it becomes very like a weapon that is just very dangerous if used incorrectly. Okay, and again, okay, when you're in HTML land, you want to focus purely on the meaning of your content and not the style of your content. So when you're choosing these class names, try to choose class names that have semantic meaning. For example, class, this is company name. Okay, again, you're marking up your text further now, okay, in further detail to describe the content. Because let's say H1, that's pretty generic. It's just the main title, but what is it really? Okay, so your class names that you define can actually give it a little bit more custom meaning. So here is my company name. Next, oh, hey, this is a slogan. Okay, next, oh, this is my product list. Next, each one of these, oh, it's an item within my product list. Okay, I know that name's a little generic. But try to use class names with that purpose in mind. Okay, and again, this can be highly abused because there's a lot of flexibility And people can argue against this as well. There can be huge debates on this, and there have been huge debates and wars, and friends have been, lost. Best friends have split up because of such topics. But you can, for example, let's say class. You can say class blue title, and anything with blue title as a class name will make that title blue, obviously. And again, here is the catch too, is that now you just incorporated its style into your HTML file, which is considered best practice. Okay. Again, there's many, very opinionated people out there that would argue against that, because they would argue that no, you should put style into your HTML, but the W3C recommendation is no. Okay, is no. Okay, HTML is for content, CSS is for style, and even though the W3C originally, okay, again, people may argue with me on this one, even though HTML originally, the W3C, they allowed you to write inline styles, they allowed you to write CSS code directly in your HTML, but I think we can all agree, for the most part, that that's just bad practice. Okay, it makes your code very inflexible, makes your HTML very dependent on your style as well, and things like that would be hard to scale. Okay, so that's another topic on its own. But the summary here is try to use semantic meaning for your class names and not visual meaning. Visual meaning is, let's say, class green or class big, class small, okay? Versus semantic is, let's say, this is my company name, this is my slogan, this is my products list. Okay, so enough of that, moving on, wasted enough time on that. Okay, so once you have your class names in your HTML, then now, like I said, you have your hooks that you can put your style onto. All right, so the example here, I'm just trying to show that even though you put your class names and you load it in the browser, nothing changed yet because you haven't hooked any styles onto those class names yet. Okay, so once you start styling with a CSS file, so here, for example, okay, in the CSS file, this is how it's usually formatted, is you have a little hook, okay? You're calling out the hooks now, the class names, and inside each of those hooks, you start to put little fabric colors on it and stuff, and that's what's going to start to pepper on that style or hook on that style onto your HTML. Okay, so the syntax here, little syntax stuff, is that when you have a dot followed by a name or a word, the dot represents, hey, this is a class name that I'm trying to specify or hook onto. Okay. All right, finally, okay, once I have my HTML file, or not HTML, once I have my CSS file, how do I load that, or how do I tell the browser about that file? Okay, so in the HTML, okay, there's actually a section in the head. There's a head section. So the head section will not be rendered onto the screen. It's just like, let's say, metadata, or as well like different file dependencies. Okay, so here I would link with the link tag my style.css file that I created. Okay, again, this could be any file name, okay, but whatever file name you choose, you just specify it in this href tag or attribute of the link tag. Okay, again, nothing magical about this. This is just pure text. Okay, you're just telling the browser, when the browser reads this piece of HTML, you're saying, hey, this right here is my CSS file. Okay, please read it as such. Okay, let's say you didn't put the link tag here and you just had style.css, then what would happen? Again, the browser would just render out style.css, the word itself, because it doesn't know that this is a pointer to a file. But once you tell it, you mark it up, hey, this is a link to my style sheet, a rel style sheet here, then the browser will know, hey, that's a style sheet. It's going to load it as such and interpret each of those class names and styles inside of it and hook it onto your HTML. Okay. All right, so once I specify in the HTML my CSS file, I load it in the browser, load my HTML file in the browser. Okay, again, not again. I know I go on little tangents here, but when you load, what's being loaded into the browser is the HTML file itself. That's the root. Okay, and the HTML file points to a style file that will also get loaded into the browser after the browser reads that piece of code, and then it's going to pull the HTML, or sorry, the CSS file after. Okay, but what gets loaded into the browser is just the HTML file to begin with. Okay. Okay, so now, okay, finishing touches on CSS. Let's see here. We're just gonna make it look a little bit more beautiful. We're gonna define a width for our page. We're gonna define that we want that piece of content in the center. We're gonna resize the images a little bit because the images were too big. And we're gonna look on how to remove these dots because that's ugly. Okay, we don't want these dots. Okay, so sometimes the browser will put what they call their automatic or their default styles for each tag, HTML tag. And usually, as professionals, you wipe all the default styles out and you start from scratch because usually you don't want to use these default styles, default font styles. They're just ugly, okay? And you wanna customize the style yourself. So here we're gonna remove those dots, okay? And finally, we're gonna add some padding. Okay, we're gonna pad up our page so that it spreads out nicely and whatnot. Okay, so if you just look at the CSS, then okay, width 900, image, I'm gonna make each image only 400 pixels wide. And for the list itself here, I'm gonna say list style none to remove the dots. And once you open it up now in the browser, the HTML file, okay, which loads in the background the CSS file, okay, it's gonna look like this. Okay, my content's in the center now. Okay, no more ugly dot, and the pictures are more manageable now, manageably sized now. Actually, they look the same size. Sorry about that. But yeah, I was just trying to show that hey, I sized it a little better. But um, yeah, I could have sized it, let's say, to 50 pixels. It would have been more teen. Okay, but in this example, I sized it to 400 pixels wide. Yep, yep. Okay, so common CSS style used in everyday work. Okay, so there's a huge flurry of different attributes you can specify, style. But here's just a list of the common ones you'll use every day in work. One is the color of the font. Two is the font size. Three is the background color of, let's say, your page or this particular block. Background image, let's say this particular block has a background image or pattern you want to specify. You have your margin, your padding, which spaces out each piece of content so they don't, lie right next to each other. You can space them out with margin, padding as well. We can have a discussion what's the difference between margin and padding, but that's another topic. Okay, no, we'll talk about it now because I don't know if I'll ever get to this. Okay, you can think of margin as your cement. Okay, so you have bricks, you're laying bricks on a wall to make a wall. Okay, your cement is your margin. Okay, versus padding, okay, let's say you have a box and you want to put some fragile elements inside this box like a vase. Okay, then you want to pad up that box internally. Okay, so that's the best analogy, the difference between the two and when you would use one over the other. Okay, so when you're using it, just imagine, am I padding a box or am I cementing a brick fence together? Fence, brick wall together. Okay, so that's the difference between the two, just for you to know. Okay, and my recommendation. Again, you can abuse it and use it however you want, but that's the recommendation from moi, and I think many people, professionals as well. Okay, then you have your positions and floats, which positions elements on your page. Okay, and the point here is I'm saying Google is your best friend. So even as professional developers, you're not going to remember how to do everything in CSS or let's say even HTML. Okay, so whatever you're trying to achieve, Google is your best friend. As professionals working every day, that's what you do. Okay, how did I round out the edge of the boxes? Oh, okay, search out on Google, round borders, and then anything you search, let's say you're searching something specific with CSS, obviously common sense, put CSS uh, at the end, okay, followed in the beginning with what you're actually trying to do, okay, and 99 out of 100 times it will come up an answer, a website, someone will have summarized very nicely how to do that exactly, and you can just copy paste their code and just edit it for your own needs. Because again, web development is so commonplace that anything that you're trying to do, someone has done it before, and someone has been nice enough to write up about it. Okay. All right, finally sprinkling on the special effects. So now we're gonna, in our example, we're gonna put some JavaScript into our page. So again, what we're gonna do is we're gonna initially hide that menu and slowly fade it in for a nice little special effect on top. Sprinkle that special effect on top. And here in my JavaScript, I'm using a library called jQuery, which most people nowadays I don't think use anymore. But it used to be a very nice library back in the day that made your JavaScript a lot more compact. And actually, I would still use it nowadays, but nowadays they have much more fancy full frameworks of JavaScript that where you wouldn't be using just bare JavaScript in a, let's say, HTML file anymore. But okay, so this is your JavaScript file. Let's just say this is your JavaScript file, and it's pretty apparent here what we're doing. Okay, we're going to call, again, our class names provide hooks we can hook onto, not only for styling, but for JavaScript to put special effects on it. So we're going to initially hide our menu list, and after we're going to slowly fade it in a 5-second duration here. Okay, 5,000 milliseconds, so 5 seconds. Okay, so once I have my JavaScript file defined, then I can specify it in my HTML file, similar to my style sheet, my CSS file. Okay, but differently, it has a different tag, surprisingly. It has what we call a script tag, not a link tag, but a script tag. And the source attribute, we will specify the path to our JavaScript file. So for example, in the previous example up there, I was using the jQuery library, so I loaded in the jQuery base file here, and then I loaded in after that my file itself, the script file that I wrote, which was script.js. Okay, again, nothing magical about this, it's just pure text. Okay, so if you didn't have the script tag, the browser would just think this is just random text and would just display it as random text. But by saying that this is a script, marking it up, this is a script, the browser is going to read that script and actually start to execute that script. Okay, and the recommendation here, I'll just say it here because if I don't say it here, you may find it out in one way or another, or may never find it out. The recommendation is that you put your scripts at the very bottom of your HTML. Let's say right before you close the body tag. Here I should have closed it, a little typo. But you want to put your script tag all the way at the bottom of your HTML, and the reason for that is that when you're loading a web page, okay, you want to load, again, web pages when you want to build progressively. So even though, let's say even if your CSS file is not loaded, at the bare minimum, it should load your HTML file, and at the bare minimum, your customer should be able to see your data at the bare minimum. Okay, and let's say a little icing on the cake, if the style sheet can be loaded, then now my customer can see the style. Okay, and a little bit more icing on the cake, if my JavaScript file can be loaded now, then my customer will see the special effects. But those last two layers were, let's say, optional, okay, not critical. Okay, your data is most critical. Your data is most critical. Your HTML is most critical. So when you're doing load speeds, on a web page on a browser, okay, by putting your JavaScript last, it's gonna load your content first, and then the special effects will come in after as needed. Okay, we want to have our priorities straight. Rather than if we put the script file first, it might hang a little bit when the user's trying to load your web page because your browser's got to download that JavaScript file before it can show the page. That's if you put the script tag in the beginning. But by putting it at the bottom, it's going to display your HTML first and your style first before it starts to download that script file and then load it after. Okay, so once you've written your JavaScript, specified it in your HTML, loaded into your browser, then here, of course, I don't show the animation, but it's slowly fading in, if you can imagine. Okay, it goes from not being there to slowly fading in. Okay, and I know this presentation is going on quite a while, but we will hopefully finish soon. So the only things I'm trying to show here is that there's just so many JavaScript libraries written out there, third-party libraries. Web developers, coders in general, they're nice people that share their code. So if they created something cool, they will share it with you for the most part. And here I'm just showing that let's say a common design pattern is to have, let's say, a slideshow. And if you need a slideshow on your page, you can just, again, go on Google, just search, hey, I want a slideshow in JavaScript, and something's going to show up. So a popular library back in the day, was a library called Slick Slider. Okay, so once you load this JavaScript library in, again, it's just this JavaScript file, pre-written JavaScript file that you can load in and start to use their functions. Okay, so once you load in Slick Slider, all you have to do is specify the class name that you want to become a slider, then put .slick. As simple as that, and then that will convert your list into a slideshow. So did I show an example of that? No, but it will convert this hamburger list into a slideshow now. As simple as that. Okay, again, JavaScript sprinkling on nice little effects onto your page. Okay, the last layer here. JavaScript. So looking at this next slide here, it looks like I'm sort of done with, let's say, web development in general. So again, you got your content as the most important part of your page. HTML provides structure to the content. It tells this stupid browser, what does my content mean? Then after that, I can start to hook on styles onto my HTML tags. And finally, I can start to hook on effects, little effects, or even other stuff, which I'm not going to talk about in this presentation. But we can start to hook on behavior onto our HTML tags as the last layer of, let's say, our house or our human being here. Okay, so once you've written a website, okay, just to review, because again, this is an overview of web development. Okay, how do I share that website with the world? Okay, this HTML is lying on my computer now. I can open it up in my browser in the computer, but how do I share that with the world? So here is an overview of that. Okay, you can think of a computer as a house. Okay, an analogy, a computer as your house. And in your house, let's say you have many different rooms. If you live in a big house, or if you live in a small house, maybe a few different rooms. And each room has, let's say, a room number. Okay, or let's say we're at an office building. Okay, so the office building, each room in the office building has an office number. Okay, so let's say on your computer, okay, let's say right now, you have your HTML file, your CSS file, and your JavaScript file in a folder. Okay, how would you, let's say on your house right now, on your computer, how would you share these files to the world? And the quick answer to that is you need a computer program. It's just a computer program called a web server. Okay, and this computer program, you will assign a room in your house with a room number. Okay, so for example, this web server, we're going to assign it to room number 80 in this example, and we're going to start that web server. And now, once that room is active and you open that door to that room, then people on their internet, all they have to do is have the address to your house. So let's say the address of a computer is identified by its IP address. Okay, so once you have the address to the house, and let's say you specify the file you want in that house, then once that request is sent to the computer, okay, this web server is going to look in your folder for that HTML file that was requested, and then it's going to feed it back, send it out the door, and back to the user. So that's how, let's say, web servers work in a nutshell from a very high level, and that's how you share your website to the world, is that you have to have a computer program called a web server. Okay, and web servers are pretty common computer programs. They have many open source ones nowadays, Apache, Nginx, many very common web servers that you can download and run on your computer for free. Okay, but obviously, for the most part, people don't serve their websites from their personal computers. Okay, there's just a lot of security problems with that, as well as performance problems. So what we usually do in the web world is we will rent. Okay, we'll rent an apartment, or we'll rent a computer somewhere in the world that is dedicated for this specific task of serving web pages. So what we'll do is we'll rent a computer from, let's say, a web host, and that will be the computer where we upload our HTML, CSS file, and JavaScript file, where we can now, and on that web host, they'll usually help you out by having a web server ready. Let's say if you choose a managed web host, but if you choose, let's say, a bare bone web server that you rent somewhere, then you'll also install this web server program manually yourself, which is what I do, because when you get more advanced, you like more control. So anyway, so pretty much the only difference here is you're renting a computer in the world versus using your own computer. And the advantage of this is that your own computer, you're going to turn it off at night, or it's going to go to sleep. And when it's turned off, then people that try to visit your website, this door is closed, it's turned off, so they can't access your website. Obviously, you want your website to be available 24 hours a day. So that's the advantage of renting these web servers or these computers on the internet, or not on the internet, somewhere in the world, is that they're dedicated to stay on 24/7. Okay, so at the time of writing this tutorial, that was 2017. So here are some popular web hosts, or places where you can rent computers for the purpose of web hosting, web servers. Here were just some of the top ones. Back in the day, not sure if it's still true nowadays. And again, these web hosting platforms, they're more for, I would say, beginners, meaning they provide you with the web server and everything, and it's a lot more easier. It's kind of like more 1 or 2 clicks, and you can upload your content, and your server can be ready. But let's say for me, people like me, I like to use a service called DigitalOcean. One, because it's cheap, $5 a month to rent a computer. But the advantage here is that that's pretty much what you're doing. You're just renting a computer, and you got to install everything yourself, from the web server to uploading the content, which you have to do anyway, to setting ports and things like that. But that's what I do, and I really like DigitalOcean. Okay, after you have rented your computer, started your web server, then obviously you'll need a domain name. Okay, because again, each computer will have an address, just like a house has an address that is actually an IP address. Okay, so it's actually an IP address in the background. But obviously, in your web browser, you don't want to be typing. So moving this down so you can see my web browser here. Obviously, in the web browser, the URL, you don't want to be typing in an IP address because they're just hard to remember. You want to be typing in a brand name like www.kensburgers.com. Okay, and that's what these domain names do, is that they map names to IP addresses in the backend. But the user visiting the web page, they don't have to worry about the IP address. They just worry about that name, and the name is easier to remember. So you can reserve or you can buy domain names from domain name services such as GoDaddy is a pretty huge, famous one that I buy most of my domains on there. I'm not sure if it's the cheapest, but yeah, they had good advertising. So when you think of domain names, that's one of the top ones you think about is GoDaddy.com. Okay, so once you go there, let's say I buy www.kensburgers.com. Okay, and then I can map it to my IP address, through settings and whatnot. And now when people visit my web server, okay, they will enter this address versus the IP address of the computer itself. Okay, another alternative. So again, just giving an overview. So pretty much web development, that's done. Okay, so I'm just giving some peppered on information here. Let's say for budgeting, let's say if you need to make a website or a customer needs a website or a small startup needs a website, sometimes websites can be expensive if you're hiring web development firms. Nowadays, it's not too expensive because you can go to some of those web page building websites, wix.com, something like that. But an alternative is you can actually host web content on YouTube, Facebook. You can have a Facebook business page. WordPress is kind of like your own custom page. Amazon, Twitter. So alternatives to websites nowadays for your small business is actually these platforms. You don't need a website actually. But yeah, for any professional company, you do need a website, which can cost money or time to set up. But these are some free alternatives. Actually not. Um, yeah, a company will have a website and always they will have these social platforms as well. Okay, as I mentioned earlier, okay, just concluding here, tools better than a regular text editor is Visual Studio Code. Okay, that's a very popular tool that a lot of people out there use. Um, okay, let's say players in web development. Okay, so you have let's say the customer who has their ideas, their content. Okay, you have web design firms that will program the website for you if you decide to hire something like that, which in the background consists of designers, graphic designers, that will actually design how the website looks. Okay, you'll have your front end developers that do the HTML, CSS, JavaScript, which we saw today, and then you have your back end developers which write those web servers or manage those web servers. Um, but particularly write code up those web servers. And those are your backend developers. So this is also good for if you're interested in a job in the web development field. These are, let's say, the three kinds of main positions that lie at a very high level. Not like high management. I'm not talking about management, but like just generically, these are the three main positions. And you also have what's called a full stack engineer, which does front end and back end. Okay. So they are very valuable. Um, and finally, another option is you can hire freelancers instead of web design firms. That might be cheaper. Or you can just code it yourself if you know how to code websites. Okay. Or you could go to wix.com, those websites that you can follow a wizard and it builds the page for you. But you'll lose a lot of, let's say, customization if that's what you need. Okay, and finally, websites nowadays, they're not static, meaning data is going to be loaded dynamically, data is going to be changing on a daily basis. Okay, back in the old days, you would hard code all your data into your HTML, and let's say if you needed to update your data, you would have to contact your web developer. But nowadays, most content will be loaded from a database dynamically. So in order to have that, okay, not only do you need a web server, but you also need what's called a web application and a database, such as MySQL to store your data. So this blue part here is where the back-end engineer developer comes into place. That's what they create, are those pieces of the puzzle, versus front-end engineers will handle what's in yellow, in this yellow folder, the HTML file, CSS file, JavaScript file, versus full stack engineer will handle everything, okay? Can handle everything. All right, here are some useful links. Okay, w3schools.com, one of my favorite websites for learning web development. I still reference it nowadays when I need to remember certain things. Again, Google is your best friend. And finally, I always recommend the Head First series of books for any technical related topics that they have, because they put it in a very fun and easy, intuitively understanding way of understanding things. So they're a very good um, brand of books that I like. Okay, so that is it. Hopefully web development is a little bit more clear now. I know this is a long presentation, but you just had to invest about an hour and a half listening to this, and you should have a good idea of web development in general now.